Good evening. Welcome to the November 30th edition of the Myers Report Roundtable. Tonight, our subject is postmortem on the election counting process. In the words of Ben Franklin, we have given you a republic if you can keep it. The keys to this are the faith in our election system and the right of free speech. As we meet tonight, both are being questioned, if not under direct attack. In 2005, former President Jimmy Carter, Democrat, and Howard Baker, Republican, co-chaired a bipartisan commission on the viability and sanctity of our election system. Carter and his commission identified the two greatest threats in declining order were mail-in ballots was number one, and lack of a valid voter ID was number two. Interestingly enough, earlier this week, the Rasmussen Polling Survey Organization quoted the Election Integrity Network survey. In the survey was a survey of election workers and poll observers in Maricopa County, Arizona. The sad thing is 84.3% of the respondents these are people that were working that election, did not have faith in the integrity of the election that they just worked. At issue were the mail-in ballots and voter IDs, or lack of them, and the chain of custody of the ballots because they were mail-ins. Either the republic is under attack, or it certainly seems that way. Personally, I believe we are at a dangerous, dangerous point. However, I am optimistic. Tonight, we are speaking with several experts who are leading the fight to preserve the sanctity of the ballot and to preserve the republic. God bless them. Tonight, we have Cleta Mitchell, who is working on a national level. She is an attorney and has been involved with the election fight for years. Carol Davis, who is the chairman of the Illinois Conservative Union, and who was doing such a phenomenal job. She's now teaching people how to make sure elections are secure throughout the United States. We also have comments that will be coming from Hal Dobb, who is a former congressman from Nebraska, and Paul McGonigal, who's an international banker and formerly with the Reagan State Department. Cleta, the study that was done of these poll workers in Maricopa County was actually your study. Can you tell us what happened? What did you see, and what did the study show?
Well, thanks so much, Gary. Look, I am the chairman of the Election Integrity Network, which is a project of the Conservative Partnership Institute. And for more than a year, we have been building state coalitions for election integrity to try to get citizens organized and involved in the election process. Building local task forces. We have a website, who'scounting.us. I do a weekly podcast about election issues with both experts and citizen leaders. And we published a citizen's guide to building the election integrity infrastructure, because it is literally going to take a lot of citizen involvement and engagement if we're going to fight the left and try to reclaim our election systems. And this is not about any candidate or party. It's about reclaiming our election system so that candidates and campaigns actually start to matter again. Because when you manipulate the election process, it doesn't matter who the candidates are. It doesn't matter what they stand for. The die is cast before election day, well before election day. So before the election, we determined that we were going to send a survey to the states and the coalition members, the citizens who had signed up, who had attended our statewide summits, who had volunteered to be part of the election system in their states. And so we were working on that before the election because we want to keep people engaged. And I wanted to know, even before we knew the outcome of the election, what people had seen and observed, and what their sense was about what they wanted to do going forward. And so literally within a few days after the election, we sent the survey to people all over the country. And when we sent it to the people in Arizona who are part of the Election Integrity Coalition in Arizona, we have about 250 people who are part of that coalition. We started receiving, we were flooded with responses. And this was supposed to be a multiple choice monkey survey, survey monkey. But what we started receiving were reports written out by volunteers, people who had been either paid election workers. And remember, though, the RNC sued the Maricopa County because the statute requires parity between Republicans and Democrats in terms of who is assigned to work at the polls on election day and who are the adjudication teams and all. There's supposed to be parity between the parties. And historically, and this is not true, this is not just a situation in Maricopa County, it's true all over the country, that Republicans are never at parity, that election offices fill Republican slots with Democrats or with independents who are actually Democrats. And so the RNC sued Maricopa County 2 months before the election, and they got an agreement that they would fill Republican slots with Republicans. So this survey was sent to people who were volunteer observers, as well as poll workers, election workers. And we also published a report from volunteer attorneys who were traveling around Maricopa County observing what was going on. And we were so overwhelmed with the thoroughness and the detail of these eyewitness accounts of the massive failure in Maricopa County on election day on a variety of fronts that we decided to publish all of it. And we created a separate page and we published all of their eyewitness reports. If you want to see it, it's all there. It's www.whoscounting.us/Maricopa. And we just decided to let them speak for themselves. And Hal will appreciate this, but you know, the United States of America has paid for many decades to send observers to monitor elections in third world countries, to make sure that the elections are conducted properly and that the third world dictators and the government media don't cover up problems. And I will tell you that our efforts to recruit, train, and deploy citizens to become involved in the election process is the only reason that we know what really happened in Maricopa County. And we've published all of that because the powers that be, the election officials and the media, the state media, and I call them the state media because that's what they all are. They might as well be government puppets, but they have absolutely denied what happened on election day. And let me tell you how the election day process works in Maricopa County. They don't vote by polling place or precincts. They have these giant voting centers. So when you go in to vote, and whether it's on election day, you give them your address. And it's like Starbucks, you get a custom ballot. The person in front of you gets a different ballot than the person behind you, because anybody in Maricopa County can go to any voting center. And so the first thing that has to happen is you have to get a ballot printed that is your ballot. But that means that the system has to be, the programs have to work, the printers have to be synced with the computer to generate the ballot. So the first thing that happened was they have something like 200, I think just over 200 voting centers in this enormous county. And over nearly almost half of the voting centers had complete technological breakdowns. so that the printers weren't synced. So they couldn't get ballots printed. So you start creating these long lines. It started early in the morning, all these long lines trying to get the ballots printed. Then when you finally get your ballot printed, you go over and you mark your ballot, and then you take it to the tabulator. Well, the tabulators weren't working. And so people would feed in their ballots once, twice, 10 times. They have to feed. And so then you start having these long lines of 3 and 4 and 5 hours of people waiting in line to try to get their ballot, or then to try to get their ballot tabulated. And then the election workers were told, well, put all of the, tell the people just to leave their ballots. If they can't wait any longer to try to get them tabulated, to put them in drawer 3. Drawer 3 were the untabulated ballots. Except that what happened was, they, at some point during the day, the voting centers were instructed to just combine everything. So now you have untabulated ballots combined with tabulated ballots, and totally commingled. And then you had a situation where, because people were waiting in line so long, now mind you, about noon or 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the people who were running this chaos went on television and said all the problems had been solved, but they weren't solved. They were not solved. And mind you, most Republicans in Maricopa County vote on election day. So you have the Democrats who have banked all of these mail votes, which are in themselves a horrible problem, because they don't verify the identity of people who vote by mail. And now you have the Republicans coming in to vote on election day who are literally disenfranchised, thousands of people disenfranchised. And you had all these mixed and totally wrong instructions that were handed out by the election officials on election day, and said, oh, well, there are not long lines at such and such voting centers, go there. So people were told to leave the voting center where they were standing in line and go to a different voting center. The problem is that they did not also instruct the officials, the workers at the voting center, don't let anybody leave without checking out. Because once you've checked in, if you just leave and go to another center, guess what you're told? Oh, Mrs. Smith, this says you've already voted. And so they've been standing in line for 3 hours at one center, and then told to go to a different center. They aren't checked out. They get to the next center and are told they can't vote, or they have to vote a provisional ballot, which is not counted. So and we would not know of any of this had we not sent the survey, and citizens took the time and they wrote out, and you should just read their reports of what they saw, what they witnessed, what they experienced. And once we published it, then we started getting more people who were not on in our original list, who started calling in and writing in and documenting their experience. But Maricopa County is in an era, in Maricopa County in 2020, the problem with the mail voting was so terrible that they went from a 2% rejection rate of the tabulators of ballots in 2018 to an 11% rejection rate of the mail ballots that had come in that could not be read, for whatever reason, could not be read by the tabulators. That's about 240,000 ballots, because of the number of ballots in America, just the sheer numbers of votes and ballots in Maricopa County. And so that's why Karen Fann, who was then the Senate president, said we need to do an audit of the mail ballots in Maricopa County. And of course, the person who, and let me tell you what, the people who are running the election were Republicans. They're Republicans. Bill Gates, not the Microsoft Bill Gates, but another Bill Gates, he is an arrogant SOB. And he fought that audit every step of the way of 2020, deleted files, stonewalled, they had to go to court. to obtain the records, to be able to conduct the audit. And all they wanted to do was to audit the mail ballots and the envelopes in which the mail ballots had been delivered to determine whether there was a problem. And I will tell you that the margin of difference between President Trump and Joe Biden in Maricopa County in 2020 was less than just over 10,000 votes. There were more envelopes because they had to retain the ballot envelopes and the ballot images. And there were more envelopes that had either no signature or just a straight line or a squiggle than the margin of difference. And there were double votes. There were people who voted in more than one county, way more than the margin of difference. Now, and Bill Gates and his crowd, Stephen Richer, who was elected as the election supervisor in 2020. So he was on record of opposing the audit, saying it was ridiculous. And those are the two guys who presided over this election in 2022. And it was even worse. They not only, in addition to the problems they had on election day, the tabulators could not read. And now the number is up to 15%. The last I heard was 15%. It could be even higher of the mail ballots that couldn't be read by the tabulators. So it is utter chaos there. And of course, they are so smug. They're like little czars, and they certified the election. They paid attention to the problems that the voters in Maricopa County experienced. There were thousands of people who I think were hundreds, maybe thousands, who were disenfranchised. And so it's just utter chaos. And the thing that is so shocking to me, I thought that at least if we documented this with these eyewitness accounts and just published it, put it all out there, let everybody see it, send it to reporters, let them see it. But no mainstream corporate legacy media has paid any attention to it. And if this had been in a Democratic area, if this had been in an historically low-income minority area, the Justice Department would be all over this. But silence, complete and utter silence. And all they can do is say, sort of, there you go again, you election deniers. So we have a very serious problem in this country when we can have that kind of breakdown and chaos and have a whole segment of the powers that be of our country who don't care, who think it's fine, who think it's just fine.
Cleta,
So I'll stop there.
Cleta, it seems to
Cleta,
me.
I have three questions. I've known you for years, so I'm very confident of your assessment. Are there any other jurisdictions in the country you've been looking at in this last election?
Well, yeah, look, there are. And I think, Gary's point at the beginning about the Carter Commission and is talking about mail ballots. In Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, they actually voted not to certify their election because they ran out of ballots by 9 o'clock in the morning. And then they started having everybody vote on provisional ballots. They ran out of those. Then they closed the polling places. It was a complete and utter breakdown. And you had also a situation in Pennsylvania where the Secretary of State's office reported 3 weeks before the election that the counties in Pennsylvania had sent out 240,000 ballots that had to voters whose identity had not been properly verified.
So what I'm getting at from your knowledge is get up above these two examples, as egregious as they appear to be. What's the goal here? Is it the mail-in ballot and the early ballot and the lack of verification? What solves the problem?
Well, I've thought a lot about that. And look, I do think, let me tell you what, I will make this is a factual statement. The identity of people who vote by mail is not verified, period. It is not verified. The identity is not verified. I don't care what the system is that the state has chosen. Some states have signature verification. That's not even done in Pennsylvania at all anymore, even though the statute requires it. And it's not done in public, in a publicly accountable, transparent form in any state, because we've looked at it all over the country. So people who vote by mail, their identity is not verified. And anybody who tells you otherwise does not know what they're talking about. And why do you think that is why the left wants to push that and have more and more voting by mail? They want unsupervised voting. I call it unsupervised voting. All of the things that were put into place in the election codes over the 20th century, the enhancements and improvements in election administration, to have both parties watching each other with observers, having no politicking within so many feet of the polls, all of those things, that's all gone when you have unsupervised voting outside of the polling place. And that's what happens with voting by mail. That's what allows ballot harvesting or trafficking in ballots. It's what allows vulnerable voters to have their votes basically stolen from them, whether they're in nursing homes or homeless shelters, or just people who basically have no clue what's happening. I mean, what the left has done is, what we are still thinking of is that we're going to go campaign and we're going to persuade people, and they're going to go mark a ballot for us because they're going to be persuaded by our ideas or by we run a good campaign. That isn't what the left is doing. They see.
Do you have
all
the
of this
same,
as
do you
ballots.
have the same view of voting electronically?
I absolutely do. That's even worse. That's even worse. Any voting that takes place outside of the system, where you have observers who can monitor and make sure that the identity of every voter is confirmed through a government issued photo ID, and you have clean voter rolls, which we don't have. We don't have clean voter rolls. I mean, and what's happened is we have utter chaos in our election system. And that's what the left wants. That they have spent, the Capital Research Center estimates between 11 and 14 billion dollars over the last decade, wrecking the election systems.
Cleta, what seems to me is that the Carter-Baker Commission had it right, and that we should do away with mail-in ballots. Certainly absentee ballots that are thoroughly verified and requested. We've always had that, and that makes a lot of sense. It seems to me that voting is a right, it's also a privilege, and it's also a responsibility. And my feeling is I'm opposed to election or voting seasons. I think that if we have 1 or 2 days, people, if they have the responsibility to get to the polls and keep it fairly simple with printed ballots that are counted. The Iraqis, when they had their first election, had a very simple way of verification. People dipped their fingers in indelible ink, and you knew who voted and who didn't. What we're doing now is a threat, obviously, to our democracy. Carol Davis, you've been working on ways of improving our election system. Can you tell us what you've done? Hopefully you can give us some sort of optimistic note of some progress.
Well,
Carol, what have you seen?
well, I have been on the front lines. I've been an election judge, what we call them in Illinois as judges, which is a poll worker. I've been a poll watcher. I've been a deputy registrar. I've worked a discovery recount, and I've trained, thousands of election workers, not only in Illinois, but I've helped train across the country. And I, like Cleta, am very despairing at the way the left has systematically destroyed the foundational security of our entire election infrastructure. And we on our side have been, basically bringing butter knives to gunfights. So what I've seen, I can tell you what I've seen, and I can tell you what we're doing about it. On the positive side, nationwide in this election that we just came through, 4+ million more Republicans voted across the country than Democrats. Now, you wouldn't know it by the results because they weren't in the right pockets, but there were more Republican voters out there than there were Democrat voters. But unfortunately, once again, and we haven't done all the data analysis that we have wanted yet in Illinois, because of course it's too fresh. We're still getting data. But it's appearing once again that there were more ballots counted than there were voters who voted. And that has been the case in many election cycles, not only here in Illinois, but across the country from the people that I speak of. And our election authorities don't seem to care that there are more ballots being counted than voters that are voting. In fact, Cleta and I know a wonderful lady in Pennsylvania, Heather Honey, who is the leader of their statewide coalition for election integrity. And I found out from her that Pennsylvania actually has it in their statutes that you cannot certify an election unless you're able to basically balance the books and show that the ballots equal the voters. And guess what? They ignore the law. So what we have found is—
1 second, didn't they in Pennsylvania ignore the law regarding mail-in ballots in the last election as well?
Yep. And I think that what we're finding is the biggest problem. And, and Cleta is right on the mark when she is emphasizing these local election integrity task forces. As you know, Gary, because you've known me for several years, and others on this call do, in Illinois, we came up with a program called Guardians of the Vote about 4 years ago. And we go into every county and we train them that you have to have a county election integrity task force. Because if an election is going to go off the rails, think about it, everyone. Do you hear, oh, Florida had a problem? Well, yeah, but what do you hear specifically? It was Broward County. It's Fulton County. It's Cook County. It's Maricopa County. When elections go off the rails, it is at the county level, at the local election authority level. And it's because what I'm determining is 3 different things. Either the election administrator doesn't know the law, they know the law, and due to laziness, they choose to do what's easier, not follow the law, or they know the law and they willingly choose to violate the law. And we have seen all 3 of those circumstances. Look at the people who are running our elections. There is no professional certification required to be an election administrator. In many cases, that's an elected political position. So you don't have to have any qualifications. Now, I would like the guy who's running my bank at least to know a little bit about accounting, right? I wouldn't put my money in a bank where they can't balance their books at the end of the day. But we take our golden ticket to freedom, our ballot, which is way more precious than any dollars, and we put it in the hands of unlicensed, incompetent people who aren't professionals half the time. So there's the biggest part of the reason why we need these local task forces. They need to be holding the feet to the fire of the people who are running the elections. And unfortunately, our poll workers, our task force members, we need to know the election code in our state as well as, if not way better than our election officials, because that's the only way we can hold them accountable. So what we saw firsthand on the front lines here in Illinois in this election is vote by mail processing violations. Illinois law says that the signature on the ballot envelope, which contains your ballot inside, must be matched against the voter's official voter registration signature that's on file. Voter registration signature. That is the signature which has been verified that that person who is registered is who they say they are by showing 2 forms of ID when they register. That's the law in Illinois. In many cases, there were no signatures in these vote by mail processing centers, just like Cleta said. It's even when it's stated in the law that they're going to verify that voter, vote by mail does not allow for any real verification of who's sending in those ballots. So we had very well-trained poll watchers in those vote by mail processing centers. And they saw vote by mail envelopes going through and being approved with absolutely no signatures, a scrawl that doesn't come anywhere near matching anything. And when our poll watchers shouted about it, and this is another huge problem, we don't have the principled, aggressive attorneys in every state who are willing to stop it the minute they spot that. Now, we trained about 3,000 poll watchers here in Illinois for this election cycle. We needed 7,000. We couldn't get enough people to step up to be poll watchers. So that's a big problem because, the Virginia model, eyes on every ballot, you need people watching at every one of those voting centers and the vote by mail processing centers. And this juggernaut is going to be hard to stop, folks. Once this vote by mail stuff gets started, people, it's human nature to be lazy, and we like stuff just to be delivered to us, and then we can just push it out and let somebody pick it up. And so it's ripe for problems.
So do you or Cleta know whether the Republican Secretaries of State Association has a framework to change the ballot process with respect to absentee and the verification process, and shorten the time frame for the ability to cast that ballot in that? Is there an effort being made to organize at least over half the states to stop this?
No, the Republican secretaries of state are worthless.
Well, that's the answer. I was looking for an answer, so we got an answer.
They're worthless. They're not helpful. There are some Republican secretaries of state who are good, but I would say it's the conservatives who are good, and there are a number of Republican secretaries of state who are complicit and they want to be liked, they want to be loved, and they want to throw in because they want the League of Women Voters and the media and all to love them.
Well, I don't want to dominate here, but like a manifesto, if your groups have written up 10 things that need to be changed and submit that to them and ask them to take a stand on them one way or the other, that might be a catalyst for some activity.
That's a good idea. And we're working on pulling together a national working group on legislation, election reform legislation that needs to happen. And one of the things that I think, going to Carol's point, one of the things that I think needs to happen is that we have to put some teeth into the law, because you have all these statutes and you have election officials who just disregard them. And there's
But you've made very good progress on voter ID, the photo ID.
Yes.
That seems to be the last 2 or 3 years, some progress there.
Yes, but then you have things like in Michigan, where the left put a ballot issue on the ballot to create a constitutional amendment that they told the voters, they lied to the voters. They said, oh, this is to strengthen voter ID because they're looking at the same polls we are. And so basically they completely undermined and eliminated and watered down the voter ID proposals, but told everybody it was the opposite. And, the Republicans should have sued over the false advertising and the misleading ballot titles, but they didn't. And it won. And now it's part of the Constitution of Michigan.
I want to close with an optimistic note. I was a poll watcher in a very difficult area. And I was with, basically, there was one Republican judge, and there were two Democrat judges. The Republican judge was off somewhere doing something else. And there were two Democrat judges and one Democrat poll watcher behind me. One of the judges I thought was okay. I wasn't sure, but I thought he was okay. The second Democrat judge was an honest man. I watched him, and he wanted to do a good job. And of course, there was a Democrat poll watcher who was vile and would have lied, cheated, and stolen if she had the chance, but she didn't. But the point is, there are honest people out there who are Democrats as well. And I think the key is more people involved, more education. And we educate not just the Republicans, we educate the Democrats, because I think in the end, most of the rank and file still believe in this country. I believe in the country. I am optimistic, though it's not going to be an easy fight. We must continue it. And on that note, I would like to say thank you, everyone. Good night, good luck, and God bless America.